Hey folks, Dale Davison here, the Dear VA guy. I've got hopefully some good information for you today. You know, we've had a lot of questions about, look, I was in the reserves, or I was in this area, I was in that area. Do I qualify for VA benefits? Well, the question becomes active duty. You are a veteran if you had active service, and you've got to meet some other requirements regarding your discharge. So we're talking about active duty today. So what does active duty mean? Now, there's basically 8 categories that I'm going to talk about. There's full-time duty, full-time, not part-time now, in the Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force, the Space Force, and the Coast Guard, other than for active duty training. So it's full-time duty in one of the branches of service. Number 2, full-time duty as a commissioned officer in the public health service. Okay, and there's some other qualifications. You see the individual who is the public health service administrator on TV a lot with the military uniform on. Then you have full-time duty as a commissioned officer of NOAA. Remember that? That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Those are the folks who go out there and predict hurricanes and do the weather and all that kind of stuff. Or the Environmental Services Administration. That was number 3. Number 4, you've got service as a cadet in the U.S. Military Air Force or Coast Guard Academy, or as a midshipman in the U.S. Naval Academy. And then you've got service or attendance at a prep school of the U.S. military, like the Air Force and Navy. Okay. Then you have active duty for special work, and that's maybe defined as a tour of active duty to fulfill certain support requirements for the DoD, the Department of Defense, unless it was just for training. And then also active duty might include authorized travel to or from any of the above types of activities that we just talked about. So when does active duty for training qualify you as a veteran? Because that comes up a lot. Well, I was out training, doesn't that qualify? So what is active duty for training? So active duty for training includes full-time duty for training purposes while in the reserve. So if you're in the reserve and you are your full-time duty is for training, you're active duty, okay? It can also include service by members of other organizations who are called to duty for training and other specified purposes. The key here is got to be full-time. If you're a reservist and you're just part-time, that's not necessarily active duty. So remember, active duty for training is often undertaken to provide trained units and qualified persons to fill full-time duty in the armed forces performed by reservists. Again, we've got this full-time duty. That's the key here. Full-time duty for training purposes performed as a commissioned officer of a reserve corps of the public health service. Again, full-time duty. Full-time duty for certain specified purposes performed by members of the National Guard or any state. Now, a lot of people come and they're from the ROTC, the ROTC. So duty performed by members of Senior Reserve Officers Training, ROTC, when ordered to such duty for training or practice cruises is active duty. We talked about attendance at the preparatory schools of the U.S. military, the Air Force, the Naval Academies, okay, and certain other academies. And then we looked at authorized travel to and from. So you got to look at full-time versus part-time. That's really one of the keys. A period of active duty for training and considered active service if the individual concerned was disabled or died from a disease or injury. So for instance, if you were on training mission and you are a reservist and you became disabled, or, well, you would have died because you wouldn't be here on the video with me, but if you know somebody who died, they would be considered active duty if the injury or death occurred during the training exercises. So in order to be considered a veteran for the VA based on active duty training, you must also be able to qualify for the service-connected disabilities compensation. Remember the nexus, we've talked about that in a lot of the different videos. So there's got to be a connection between your injury and or disease and your service as a reservist in order to be considered active. Okay? So for periods of active duty training, the theories of direct service connection are generally available to you. So I'm on a hike, I hurt my knee, that's directly connected. Okay, that's fine. But as far as presumptive diseases and things of that nature, that's not available to you. So you're not going to be able to use the presumptions under the PACT Act for chemical exposures and things of that nature. Likewise, you may have had a pre-existing condition or pre-existing injury. You can't claim aggravation during active duty for training. You're just not entitled to that presumption of aggravation like somebody would be on full-time duty. So if you're in those categories, then you've got to prove both that the pre-existing condition worsened during your period of active duty for training and that the worsening was caused by active duty training. So to do so, okay, you've got to demonstrate that you experienced a permanent increase in your disability beyond the natural progression of that disease or injury. Very difficult a lot of times to do, but not impossible. You do that through medical. Always do everything through the medical field and get your doctor's opinions on that. So, when does inactive, we talked about active duty training, when does inactive duty training qualify you as a veteran? As a general rule, you are a veteran if you had qualifying inactive duty training. Kind of weird, okay? But a period of inactive duty training is considered active service if you were disabled or died from the injury. Just like if you were in training and you had an accident, okay? That qualifies you, that you have inactive duty, that qualifies you as a veteran, okay? Now, realize that the definition of a disease as it relates to inactive training is different from active training. The word disease that is included in the definition of qualifying active duty for training is excluded from the definition of qualifying inactive duty training. So, I know that's confusing. The rules here, I mean, it's like a three-tiered chess, okay? So unlike active duty for training, simply contracting the disease during inactive duty training does not qualify you as a veteran. There's got to be something more. So, what is inactive duty training? Well, this includes duty other than full-time duty. If you're a reservist, including if you're a commissioned officer in the ROTC or in the public health service. Again, duty other than full-time duty. That's inactive duty training. So special additional duties authorized for reservists, including commissioned officers of ROTC or the public health service, okay, performed on a voluntary basis in connection with prescribed training and maintenance. Okay, that's also inactive duty training. So basically, inactive duty training is any kind of training that's not full-time, okay? But we get questions about, well, what about the travel? So what happens if I'm injured while traveling to or back from training? Well, that would be covered, okay, as you've got service connection there. It was during your inactive training, your travel back and forth. Well, what happens if you're training and, well, I've got course work to do? Well, inactive duty training doesn't include work study or study performed in connection with a correspondence course or attending classes and things of that nature. So, I mean, basically, look, you get a paper cut, that's not going to be covered. I'm joking. But no, look, inactive duty, you're part-time, you're in class, that kind of training does not count. So, what are some other active service that would qualify you as a veteran? Okay? Because that's the key. We need, as a general rule, full-time. So the VA considers some individuals in groups that we haven't discussed to be active service. Okay? And the VA lists these types of folks in the regulations. Okay? And they're primarily related to organizations other than the conventional armed forces. And so, for example, these are often civilians in the following groups. Now, operations during World War II to have active service. For instance, the Women's Air Force Services, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the Wake Island Defenders, and Secret Intelligence Element of the Office of Strategic Services. So those individuals that were involved in those groups are also considered active service under the VA, although they weren't technically in that particular branch of service. Now, we had a client years ago who was in the U.S. Naval Reserve. When we filed for his pension, he was initially denied. His DD-14 said USNR, U.S. Naval Reserve. Well, the VA individual who did that, who looked at it individually, said that, hey, Reserve doesn't qualify. Well, that's not necessarily the case, and we were able to demonstrate that to the VA, and eventually, of course, we had to appeal the denial, and it was a process, but we got him qualified. So let's talk about qualifying National Guard duty, okay, for federal service, okay? Realize that the National Guard are only eligible for VA benefits stemming from their federal service. This includes periods in which they are ordered into federal service, and we've had Army National Guard individuals who were ordered into service in Afghanistan. We had this U.S. Naval Reservist who was ordered into service during the Vietnam War. It could be ordered by the President of the United States. So realize we're talking about federal service only. So members of the National Guard who are ordered into the active service of a state are not eligible for VA benefits. Prime example today with the border crisis. We have Governor Abbott in Texas has ordered the Texas National Guard to come down and help secure the border. If one of those individuals is injured or contracts some kind of disease, they're not eligible for VA benefits. Number one, because it's not federal service. They're in the service of the state of Governor Abbott. And number two, the president did not order them up to go and secure the border. So I hope that helps. I mean, this part about active duty and inactive duties is pretty confusing, but just realize that as a general rule, if you were in active duty, generally you were full-time. Now, if you were just part-time, you may or may not be a veteran for VA benefits if you fall within one of those exceptions to the general rule. So we'll be glad to help you out on that, and all you got to do is just drop us a line. So hey folks, thank you for watching today. I know these videos kind of get tedious and complicated, but hey, check out this video where we're talking about statutory and regulatory bars to VA benefits. Kind of similar to the are you active duty and are you a veteran? And until next time, you be blessed.